Hi, my name is Sophie and I'm a professional doll maker. Today on the agenda I have a very special project. Earlier this year I presented to you my new line of porcelain ball-jointed dolls, the making of which can be found on my channel. All of them were dressed in fairly covering clothes. However, I wanted to also create the outfits that would show off the beauty of their figures, since a lot of work was put into their bodies as well. This is how I came up with the idea of creating a collection of doll lingerie. And that is the story I want to share today. Before I started making a new fit for my dolls, I prepared a detailed sketch. For the girls, I developed a design consisting of various bras and fairly close panties. The lingerie will be sewn from silk satin, embellished with lace, silk bows and bead embroidery. While I was drawing the designs, the girls froze in anticipation. I hope I will not let them down. Here is what I ended up with. The 3 sets of lingerie correspond with the signature colors of my dolls: blue, pink and yellow. But I also prepared sketches of underwear for boy dolls. I've been racking my brain for a while about what kind of underwear to come up with so it doesn't look silly, and it would be something I can decorate with embroidery and lace. In the end, I came up with these long shorts. There are only 2 sketches for boys, since the 3rd boy, Joseph, had been already sold by that time. When I settled on the design, it was time to move on to execution. For this project, I rummaged through my stash of fabric and chose this medium-weight silk satin. I love working with silk, and it's also the perfect fabric for lingerie, as the history of silk is actually intertwined with the history of lingerie as we know it. But I'll talk about that a little later. What I don't like is buying industrially dyed fabrics. Usually the colors of such fabrics are too plain, and I'm always looking for something more sophisticated. Let's make a special mix of colors and dye the fabric. After dyeing, I got 3 pieces of fabric in rich and unique shades. In fact, each of them had to be dyed several times. The dusty pink one was especially demanding, but I believe this step is required. Beautiful fabric is the foundation of a beautiful garment. Now I need to create the sewing patterns. I made a pattern using the duct tape method. You can find an in-depth video about this method on my Patreon, which I now have. I will tell you more about my Patreon at the end of the video, but you can find the link in the description now. I am deeply grateful to everyone who supports my work. The patterns are prepared, and I can transfer them to the silk fabric. Nowadays we often associate women's lingerie with silk, and in fact it was made of silk from its inception. For centuries, women's underwear consisted of a chemise and a corset, or stays if we're talking about the period before 19th century. At the very beginning of 20th century, everything remained the same, until the roaring 20s, when we finally see the underwear that we're used to. Corsets, chemises and their variations were still popular, but during this period we can see the spread of the familiar bras and panties. It was also the time when faux silk became widely available. While the early examples of underwear were most often made from linen and cotton, generally speaking, the very first lingerie was made of silk. Meanwhile, I had all the pattern pieces transferred to the fabric and cut out. I've sorted them by color and also treated the edges with fray check, just to make them easier to work with. Now it's time to look at my lace stash. Every lingerie set will be embellished with a few types of lace, so I spent a long time choosing the right lace for each piece, keeping in mind that they should all work together. To buy lace, I constantly visit small specialty shops, choosing the finest and most beautiful lace. Over the years, I've accumulated quite a collection, but every time I work on a new piece, I feel like I don't have enough options. Actually, this applies to all the materials in my workshop. Once the choice was made, I cut the lace to size and attached it to the corresponding parts of the garment using adhesive tape. As you saw in the sketches, I want to decorate the panties and shorts with wider lace at the side front. This part of the lace needs to be attached now, before the piece is sewn. The rest of the trim will be added to the finished pieces. I iron the lace through a piece of fabric, so it doesn't stick to the iron. All the parts of the future lingerie are now prepared. The sewing shall begin. I started by putting the panties together. This is the easiest piece to make, and it is sewn using fairly standard methods. With brass, I have to be much more creative, and I'll show you my special technique for making brass later in the video. I attach the parts and pieces with pins, making sure all my lines match perfectly. At such small scale, even the slightest inaccuracy will cause the entire piece to be skewed. Then I baste the parts together. Pins are nice initially, but the thread holds the parts much better, and they will not slide anywhere when I make the final seam. Last, I can do the seams on the sewing machine. Now let's move on to finishing the edges. I left excess fabric both at the waist and in the leg openings. The waist will be hemmed, so I keep the excess fabric to fold it later, but at the bottom I cut it off. Now I finish the edges with a blanket stitch. If you are sewing a larger item, you can use a sewing machine and make a zigzag stitch, but it will be less precise and you will inevitably have some threads sticking out of the fabric. I prefer to do everything as neatly as possible, so I finish the edges by hand, leaving absolutely no fraying. Now the top edge can be folded over. To make it a bit easier to handle, I basted it in place and then sewed the edge with a running stitch, catching only a couple of threads from the face of the garment. This way, you can hardly see the threads on the face. All that remains is to finish the seam allowances on the inside. Since I am doing everything by hand, I can leave very small allowances and only finish the edges that are still exposed. This way I avoid unnecessary bulk. You can also see a piece of interfacing where the buttons will be. I added it to strengthen the fabric and protect it from wear and tear. It's time to attach the remaining lace. I left an open blanket seam on the leg openings, and now it will be covered with lace. I sew it with 2 running stitches, catching only very small sections of lace. Since I use ivory thread, the same color as the lace, this seam will be completely invisible from the face. Now all that remains is to sew on the buttons and loops. For the buttons, I use beads and the loops are made of threads in the same color as the fabric. The buttons can be fastened and now the panties are ready to wear. But it is not the end yet, there's even more embroidery and decoration ahead. However, for now, we can put the panties aside and move on to making brass. When it comes to bras, the most confusing thing is how the heck to make the cups? Well, I've been making doll bras for almost a decade, tracking back all the way to 2015, and I've developed my own tried and true technique. So, let me share my secret. For the foundation of the cups, I use paper mache. I soak a piece of cloth and glue, then place it on my mannequin and brush it down to remove folds. Make sure to use some kind of mold release or cling film so the glue doesn't stick. Once the paper mache has dried, I carefully sand it so that the surface is perfectly smooth. Then I draw the shape of the future cups on the paper mache, remove it from the mannequin, and cut out along the line. Before covering the cups with fabric, I prefer to paint them a matching color. The fabric I use is dense enough to not be see-through, but I like to be on the safe side. Now I can apply glue to the cups and cover them with fabric. I place the fabric from the center to the edges, so that there are no folds. When the fabric has dried, I can start folding the edges. I cut darts in the excess fabric and carefully glue the edge from the inside of the cup. I do the same thing with each cup for each bra. Once the cups are done, they can be embellished. I glued lace to the cups of the pink and yellow bras. For the blue bra, I plan to attach the lace to the inside so that only the edge is visible, so I will do that later. The cups are done. It's time to start making the chest band. To do this, we need to go back to the already forgotten parts of our pattern. First, I attach the piece of interfacing to the inside of the future band, to help the fabric hold its shape. As I mentioned before, the bra is a descendant of a corset. Its purpose is to support the body and create a desired shape, not too different from its infamous ancestor. So, we need a sturdy base. Next, I created this monstrosity of pins and basting stitches. All this is done solely for the purpose of hemming the edges. After the fabric is ironed, I removed all the basting stitches and attached the edges with adhesive tape. I don't like to sew the fabric here, since it inevitably puckers. Instead, I place small pieces of adhesive tape in the hem and carefully glue it down. This way, I get a very neat and smooth edge. Now the bras are ready to be assembled together, but for convenience, I first create the closure on the back. There's a variety of options for closure, and one day I'll make a piece that's laced up. But for now, I'll do a good old button closure. Seriously, let me know if you want to see a laced up bra or corset. I really want to try it, and I think it would look amazing. Okay, all that's left is to attach the cups to the chest band. I put the chest bands on the mannequin, applied some glue to the cups and put them in their respective place. I use PVA glue that is meant for carpentry, and it's as strong as a thread, or even stronger. I also glued the lace to the inside of the blue bra. I will hide the inside of the cups under the lining that I cut out and glued off camera. As a final touch, I attached the straps made of matching silk ribbons. The girls' lingerie sets are sewn, but there is one more element that I decided to add. I think a pair of silk shoes would go perfectly with the lingerie. I wanted to make something both elegant and relaxed, essentially very fancy house slippers. I came up with a design of a flat shoe with a pointy tip, and each pair is going to have a touch of individuality with bows and ribbons. I made a papier-mâché base, then sanded it, marked out the shape, and cut along the lines. A quick fitting is done to make sure everything is right. Next, I painted the base to match the fabric, applied glue, and covered the base with silk. By the way, if we're talking so much about history today, did you know that shoes were not differentiated for right and left foot up until 19th century? There's a lot of discourse on why did this happen, but it's clear why those shoes were actually pretty comfortable to wear. In the past, shoes were made of softer materials, such as soft leather and fabric, so they would mold to the wearer's feet over time and shape as left and right. Also, shoes were custom-made to the client's measurements, which improved the fit. In 19th century, more and more shoes became mass-produced, and it's likely that they started to differentiate the right and left shoe to fit a wider range of people. Speaking of making silk shoes, I am often asked how do I get rid of glue stains on fabric, and the answer is, unfortunately, I don't. You just have to be very careful and avoid stains. My advice is to apply a very thin layer of glue so that it does not bleed through the fabric, and keep your fingers clean. I have covered the soles of the shoes with silk, and now we can start assembling. I glued the toe and the heel together, then attached the sole. The final touch is the insole. I cut out the insoles from ivory silk and glued them in place. Also on the blue shoes, I made a loop on the heel, which will be used to attach the tie on the ankle. The girls' lingerie sets are almost finished. As I said, there will be embroidery on them, but I plan to embroider all the pieces at the same time, so for now, let's move on to the boys' shorts. Do you have any ideas for the underwear for men? That's what I thought. With men's underwear, we have much less historical pieces to draw inspiration from, because, well, there was no underwear for men for a long time. I mean, there was a shift or a loose short. It was worn as the bottom layer of the garment, and it was also tucked in the pants to serve the purpose of the underpants. Don't know about you, but it sounds extremely uncomfortable to me. Instead of reinventing something that exists, I made up my own design of embroidered shorts. Shorts are just short pants, so they are sewn in a very similar way. The standard procedure: pin together, baste, and then sew on the machine. Then I finished all the edges with a blanket stitch. The hem on the leg openings is finished differently for the two pairs. On the pink shorts there will be no lace at the bottom, so I fold the hem and sew it with a running stitch. On the blue shorts, I finished the hem with a blanket stitch and attached a lace trim. All that remains is to make the closure. I sew the same 3 buttons and loops as on the women's panties, but this time on the front. Therefore, 5 sets of lingerie are finished. In fact, these are already great garments and can be left as is, but I want to add a bit more chic with embroidery. To begin with that, I took the smallest Japanese beads in size 15-0. I really like these shiny ivory beads. They are quite moderate but very elegant, and to me they resemble tiny pearls. I like to make these straight rows of beads along the side seam. It is a simple but beautiful element that, in my opinion, immediately takes the product to the next level. This embroidery looks very simple, but in fact it requires some diligence, since the beads need to be placed at the same distance and strictly parallel to each other. I decided to do this embroidery on all the panties and shorts to tie the collection together. Next, I move on to the bras. I decided to add 2 rows of beads on the blue bra, since it has the widest chest band. On the pink and yellow bras, I added a few beads that resemble buttons. Then I moved on to the elements that you can never have too many of. I prepared 19 tiny bows from the thinnest silk ribbon, and now these bows will decorate all the elements of the lingerie, including the shoes. I sewed the bows under the rows of beads on the sides of the panties. I really like how the bows complete these elements of decoration. I also sewed a bow in the center of each bra. And as the final touch, I decorated the shoes with bows. On the pink and blue shoes, the bows are located in the center of the toe, and on the yellow pair, I decided to add very small bows on the side. At last, my own collection of doll lingerie is finished. Before we move on to demonstrating the lingerie on the models, I want to show it to you up close. I have been making doll lingerie for quite a long time, and I can say that there is no secret to this craft, except practice makes perfect. This is the first time I have made multiple sets on such small scale, and with that come unique challenges. However, I am very pleased with the results and look forward to creating even more interesting and complex pieces. While you enjoy the final result, I want to say a few words about my Patreon and my other projects. Firstly, if you enjoyed the video, I would be very grateful if you subscribed. Secondly, not only the lingerie, but also the dolls you see on the screen were created by me. You can watch in-depth videos about their creations here on my channel, and you can find them on my website. Some of the dolls in this video are available for purchase. The option to order dolls and lingerie is also now available. You can find more information on sophiedolls.com. The link is in the description. And finally, I want to introduce you to my Patreon. There I am sharing early updates, behind-the-scenes content, and an exclusive video every month. Right now on Patreon, you can find a tutorial on making a pattern using tape, and in the future there will be videos dedicated to smaller projects that didn't make it onto the main channel. If bonus videos aren't your cup of tea and you just want to admire beautiful dolls, on Patreon you can also find photos of my projects and the process of working on them. I try to make such content as aesthetically pleasing as possible. In addition, you will get early access to the videos on my channel, and your name will appear in the credits. I am deeply grateful to everyone who supports my channel on Patreon, but you can also support the channel by liking this video, writing a comment and subscribing. I respond to most comments and really appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for watching, have a great day, and see you next time.